It's Friday, and you know what that means. We've selected 5 Calgary Barbell viewers who have emailed in their lifting videos, and we're gonna critique them. We're gonna answer their questions, and we're gonna try to help them get better and stronger as power lifters. So let's get into it. After we mention that this video, like every Form Check Friday, is brought to you by Bells of Steel. They're awesome. We're gonna talk about a big sale of theirs later. Who's up first, Dill?
First up, we have Joshua.
Joshua.
He needs help with keeping his rack position more stable and help with bracing.
Okay, that's it?
That's it.
Nice and easy. All right, so bracing. I guarantee if you've watched this series before, you have heard me say this before, but I'm gonna say it again. It bears repeating. Let's pull those, everybody say it with me, ribs down. So biggest thing we're seeing here is we're just overextended, right? We're arched up, heads up, we're kind of looking up. I want you to look like down and out here. I want you to pull these ribs down so that we can get into a more neutral, less extended position. And I also think we're missing depth here. We're a little shy on depth. I think that part of the reason we're having trouble getting depth is because when you're extended like this feels like about as low as you can go. If you can get those ribs down, you can sit back a little more, you can get into a less anterior pelvic tilt, right? So this is your pelvis, this is the front of you. Anterior pelvic tilt, your butt's out behind you like that. Posterior pelvic tilt, your butt's towards the front like that. Now I know that defies normal convention. The way I like to think about it is if your pelvis was a bucket of water, again, front, back. If your pelvis is a bucket of water, which side is the water gonna pour out of? Anterior pelvic tilt means the top of the pelvis is tilting anteriorly towards the front. Posterior pelvic tilt, the top of the pelvis is tilting towards the posterior. What we're seeing here with Joshua is anterior pelvic tilt, right? We're overextended in the back. That closes up a lot of different spaces in the hip. It puts you into a different position, and in most cases, it will make it harder to hit depth. So, Joshua, I think that is probably the single biggest thing. I would maybe look at trying to get that bar a little lower down your back. It's looking like we're in a pretty high bar position. I think if we get that bracing down right, we get sitting back into a bit more of a hinge at the start of the lift, we're probably also gonna be comfortable moving that bar very slightly down your back. A low bar squat is for, I would say, almost everybody, gonna be slightly stronger, slightly better at moving weight. And if we're powerlifting, that's what we're after. So try those couple of things out. We have a full squat tutorial video, a definitive guide to squatting. We have multiple videos on bracing around the channel. Maybe Dylan will put them up on the screen. Maybe they'll be in the description box, or you can just look them up. But we have lots of resources on that stuff, so check it out. Next
up, we have Bells of Steel.
Bells of Steel and their summer sale, June 27th to July 8th. There's gonna be door crashers. So I'm not exactly sure what that means. Like, you just gotta get there early, right? They don't want you breaking things.
I guess so.
Don't break anything at Bells of Steel, but you can go to their location here in Calgary, and I assume if they have a couple other actual locations and showrooms that you can go to bellsofsteel.com to find out if there's one near you. But they have 20% off of the Blitz Air Rower, their buzzsaw bench, the belt squat machine, the Hydro Steel row pad, which I actually really want to get one of those. I think that would be dope to have here. They have 30% off their SS4, which in my opinion is bar none the best safety squat bar. I've been using ours like crazy. I've put a lot of weight on that thing, and it is comfortable as heck. There's just, the list goes on. There's so many things on sale. Go and check them out, bellsofsteel.com or .us if you're in the States. They're a wonderful sponsor of ours. Shout outs to them for letting us do this thing we do. Now, do we have a person next or another ad?
Yeah, we have a person.
Ah,
I think.
all right. Let's
Maybe.
take a look.
We'll see, I guess.
Maybe this is an AI bench press.
This is June?
John or June?
She is running the DUP program of bench 3 times a week.
Okay.
Middle finger on the ring.
Gotcha.
Regarding the bench press, she has some doubts. Number 1, when she starts using leg drive at the bottom, the tension in the quadricep is lost, causing the tension to loosen instantly. Number 2, what are some more transferable movements to strengthen the support and stability of the upper back? And number 3, is it better to put feet back or forward, or does it depend on individual mobility and body structure?
Okay. What's number 1?
When she starts using leg drive at the bottom.
Okay, so number 1's the leg drive. This is gonna tie into number 3 actually, because I think you might find some success with moving your feet out a little more. I think, for me anyways, I recently made this change in my own bench, but having my feet a little further out allowed me to more easily translate my leg drive through the bench as a whole, to be able to create this kind of global extension all the way through from the shoulders, you know, through the whole body, and create this nice sort of bridge brace where we're just pressing back the whole time. You set it and forget it. It's very consistent. It's very locked in. One thing I'm going to point out that wasn't in your list of questions is that I definitely want you to pause these benches better. I think we almost kind of paused that first one. Maybe they're like dead stop, but more or less these are touch and go reps. And I think if you're doing something like DUP, again, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm gonna make some assumptions. Often it's gonna be just, you know, multiple exposures of your competition bench press. So that leads me to think that this is just bench, competition bench. If this is competition bench, we need to be pausing it. We should be pausing every rep of comp bench until we get to maybe 8s and up. But I think anything, you know, especially 6 reps or less per set, we should absolutely, definitely be pausing on the chest. And that leads into number 2. What are some of the best exercises for building upper back stability? Long pause bench press. Bench press with pause. A lot of those things are gonna be very specific adaptations. There are definitely things that you can do to train your upper back to have a little more sort of general strength endurance, right? Things like a wide grip seated row where you're mimicking your bench position, both with your grip on the bar and on the touch point, the end range of motion with your cable row. You can do that for nice high reps, sets of 12 to 15 at a relatively high intensity with short-ish rests. That will help develop some more general qualities of strength endurance, maybe some hypertrophy in your upper back. But the number 1 way to make sure that you're able to keep your upper back organized when it comes to the bench press is practicing the bench press, practicing the pause, making sure that every single time you do the bench press, it is the same. Increasing that consistency is one of the most surefire ways to get your bench moving. And to come back around and kind of finish off point 3, usually, yes, the leg drive can be a very individual thing. I think it often has a lot to do with where people are comfortable in terms of their hip position, right? Because we have some people with a very wide stance, some people with a very narrow stance, a little further out, a little further back. I would encourage you to experiment with different leg drive positions and see if you can find something where you're not feeling like you're losing leg drive as soon as you start the press. I would encourage you to start with moving your feet from where they are to maybe kind of almost out in line with the post here, and kind of tucked in, not against it, but close to it. Give that a whirl. Let me know how it goes. Who's up next? I got dogs sniffing me.
Next up, we have David.
David
is deadlifting.
David deadlifts.
With sumo, he feels that he has an easier time off the floor, and locking out is the challenge, which seems backwards from how it usually is described. His starting position feels strong, but having a hard lockout on sumo indicates to him something is going wrong, and I'm interested in how to fix it.
All right. So, I think we gave a very similar critique last week to a lifter, and I was talking about this pelvis position. And it looks like we're running into that same kind of issue, right? The pelvis is kind of tilted, dumped under you. This is posterior pelvic tilt. Now, posterior pelvic tilt, in the case of specifically the sumo deadlift, usually goes hand in hand with that tough lockout. It changes things so that we're better able to, kind of muscle it up off the floor, but then we get to the top, because we're in that posterior tilt, we have to kind of really do a lot of work with the low back and extensors to get to a lockout position. So the number one thing I would try to get you to do is work on this start position. So I think that we can narrow things up here. And I know, again, this is crazy. I always tell people to widen their grip, widen everything. In this instance, I'm gonna tell you, you should maybe narrow your grip a tiny bit. You should maybe narrow your stance a tiny bit. Let your knees go a little more forwards, a little more ahead of you, and just try to get your low back into a position where your pelvis is more neutral. So even if that means a high-ish hip position, some people are gonna be good pullers with a relatively high hip. Now, this might not mean that you get into a perfectly, extended, even anterior pelvic tilt kind of position. It might mean you just go from being very flexed to slightly less flexed. But if we can hold that position, we're gonna have an easier time at lockout. The next thing I'm seeing here is, it looks like we're really, again, because of this position, we're missing a lot of hips at lockout. There's a lot of trying to just pull back on the bar and trying to do a lot of work with the back, mid back and upper back, where ideally in the sumo deadlift, when we get that bar to about the knee height, we're just squeezing the glutes. We're just squeezing those butt muscles, just clenching. And that's gonna be how we lock it out. In this position, it's really hard to do that. The other thing I would probably do while you sort of retool this and do some technical work on the deadlift is I would either ditch the belt or loosen the belt, because in a lot of cases, the belt just kind of confounds your ability to tell where you are in space, or to tell how your body is oriented. Another glossary term from the A&P textbook, but kinesthetic awareness. Your awareness of how your body's positioned or how it relates to other structures in space. When we have that extra feedback of the belt being clamped on pretty tight, it makes it really hard for us to kind of control and be aware of all of the muscles and structures in our mid, low back and pelvis. So those would be the things that I would do. It also looks like we're a little shy on lockout, to be totally honest with you on this rep. I don't think we fully get all the way there. I think we get pretty close, but I'm not sure we get all the way through. And so on this one, like that back position is where we want to be through the whole lift. And you can see here, see how everything kind of crunches when you have this, the belt just gets like enveloped basically, because your body's like folding forwards over it in that very specific segment. And then as we get to the top, you pop the belt back out by extending and getting back into a more neutral back position. This back position is what I want you to work to achieve in the start position and work to maintain as you break the bar off the floor. It may require you lighten the loads even substantially for a period of time. I don't think that it's gonna be, an especially limiting thing in the long run, but I think if you take the time to retweak it and put some work into it now, I think you're gonna be very happy in the long run. Dylan, David deadlifted. Now Dan.
Yep. Yeah, we have another D.
Alliterative Form Check Friday.
We have Dan. Dan is squatting.
Dan's doing squats.
Dan has competed in powerlifting and strongman a few times, but has been away from powerlifting for 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
He's relearning his squat again. He feels it's pretty good, but is looking for what to improve to take it to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
He's aware that he should get out of the mirror and there's some butt wink, but is not sure if that's a problem or not.
Yeah. So first thing I would say is, mirror, right? I can see the rack next to you. You can set it up so you're looking out. That's just going to be way better for you. The next thing, again, is that brace, right? I think it's limited here, right? In that not only are we able to get pretty decent depth with a bit of extension, the amount of extension and flexion is you know, the amount we're moving around is pretty limited. But I also think that's because this looks like it's pretty light for you. It looks like this isn't, you know, a super challenging or testing load. I think that if we can try to stay more in this more neutral position when we start the squat, as opposed to, you know, kicking the hips back without keeping the ribs attached on the initiation, then we're not going to see that. And so butt wink isn't really the issue, right? The fact that we have that little bit of lumbar movement in the bottom isn't the issue. The issue with trying to achieve and maintain a more neutral position is just that we can maintain a more neutral and braced position, that we can have less dynamic and less changing in the parts of the structure, the parts of the body that we want to be more consistently tense. Like, we want our trunk to just be a block of concrete throughout the squat, so that when our legs push, it moves. Like, that's it, right? If I were to push on this table, it's very solid. If I were to push on this table and there was a joint in the middle of it and it was like moving around, I would not be able to, you know, get my force through to the other side as well. So be the table is what I'm saying, right? Try to learn to hinge back and sit back into your hips without that excessive extension in your low back. And I think that you'll find that's probably pretty easy for you. I don't think it's going to be challenging because you look like you have a really good sort of basis for your squat movement. Your upper back looks really good and tight. You know, there's a fair bit of head movement, but again, that might just kind of go away if we stop squatting, looking in the mirror. But that head movement also goes kind of hand in hand with trying to be overextended and trying to drive the chest up and trying to be tall. And a lot of those cues from a time a while ago when chest up was like the biggest squat cue that people would throw around, right? I'm all about that chest down, and I don't mean just like dump it, but I do mean try to clamp your ribs down on top of your abs and find a lot of ab tension, oblique tension, and lat and low back tension, right? So if these are your ribs and this is your pelvis, we want this. Like, we want it all to come together. So, you know, abs on the front, pulling things down, lats and mid back on the back, pulling things down like that. And then it just tilts as a unit, as opposed to this, right? Where we see that excessive extension, we see the pelvis kind of pop out of position a little bit. And that's where we're seeing that little bit of movement throughout. So again, you're just gonna get easier force transfer if things are more locked in. Other than that, dude, you got a great squat. Like, everything's moving super well. Even from this angle, I think your depth is pretty solid, and this angle usually makes depth look pretty bad. So you're doing a great job, man. Keep it up. Let's just work a little on that bracing. Nice work, Dan. Who's after Dan, Dylan?
After
Is it a deadlift?
Dan, we have a deadlift. And
Dang.
it is Luca.
Oh, Luca.
Luca, so this is another one from Germany.
Why didn't we have a D name?
So Luca's from Germany and competing in the 74 kilo weight class. Had one
Damn,
block
okay.
where he switched from sumo to conventional. And this was his final week of the block. His issue is that his knees immediately lock out at the start of the lift, so he's doing all the work with his lower back. He doesn't know how to fix it. It's even occurring with lighter weights, but it feels like this is how he performs best. Is it even necessary to fix this movement? I think this is our second deadlift where someone is locking out early.
No, I think the other one
We
was
had that last week.
the last week
Yeah.
one. Yeah,
It seems to be a common theme
Right.
now in form check, is all I'm saying.
right. So first off, Luca, you switched from sumo to conventional, and I just want to ask, who hurt you? It's okay. It's not your fault. You don't have to do this to yourself. Okay, so number one, I don't know if our knees are locking out early. I think the knees do come back early. I think the knees also come in early, which a lot of the times, if we get that inward knee angle, right, where we see that knee valgus, what happens is that's gonna make it harder to get your glutes going. And if it's harder to get your glutes going and get contribution from your hips, then yeah, I can see where that's maybe gonna cause the back and the erectors to do a little bit more work. Just do a little experiment for me. If you're sitting at home, right? Keep your feet planted on the floor, push your knees in towards one another. Try to squeeze your butt muscles. Then keep your feet planted on the floor, push your knees out wide, and try to squeeze your butt muscles. You feel a difference of how much you can get out of those and how that positional change affects the leverages and your ability to kind of access things there, right? So when the knees cave and crowd in like that, I think that's more what we're seeing the result of here. When you're talking about like not feeling like you're anything but your back is doing the work. I think if you can work to keep your knees wedged out into your arms, I would maybe say we could widen the grip a little bit, but I don't know. Seems to be really trendy right now to hook like half on the smooth or fully on the smooth. So maybe that's a very specific choice. I think in a lot of cases, being a little bit wider with the grip is going to give you more room to keep your knees aligned and, you know, keep them either a little more straightforward or kind of wedged out just slightly. And B, it's going to give you a little bit better ability to get your upper back pretty tight. Although, as a 74 lifter, despite you being jacked, you're probably not super wide, right? Like, generally speaking, your arms are straight down from where your shoulders hang. So I don't think we're necessarily too crowded to the point where we're not going to be able to get our back set. But that might have some impact with things, right? We might be better able to hold our upper back, which means, you know, our lower back and mid back do a little less work and just kind of stay in position. And then if we can keep our knees a little more out, right? If we can stay slightly more externally rotated at the hip, then I think we're going to be a little smoother off the floor. It might actually make it a little tougher off the floor to start with. But I think we're going to end up having a better time, a smoother lift. I gotta say, I don't know if we're even locking the knees. I think we might have soft knees, not on that one. You proved me wrong as I was speaking on the final rep. But I think on earlier reps, I'm not sure we actually get fully locked on the knees. Now, as to whether or not it's worth it to fix this, I would say, let's look at your deadlift results and programming during this block, as well as in the block after this. So basically, if doing conventional as an accessory works for your sumo or for your competition pull, which I'm assuming is sumo, then yeah, it might be worth, you know, fine-tuning things here, you know, trying to bring up the efficiency a little bit. But if you find that it's a training tool that doesn't really have much impact, then yeah, I don't know if I'd spend that much time trying to fine tune a lift that you're not really doing. However, maybe if you make it more efficient, then you get more out of it. Generally, probably worth it to fine tune things, but you also have to understand that every choice has consequences, right? You spend too much time fine tuning your conventional, you get too far from, you know, your sumo if your sumo's better, and so on and so forth. Anyways, that is Form Check Friday. I want to thank y'all for coming along on that wild ride with me. I want to remind you that if you're interested in submitting your lifts to be selected for Form Check Friday, head down to the description box below, or just go straight to calgarybarbell.com, where you can also check out the Calgary Barbell training app. We do form checks like these every week. Myself and 2 other Calgary Barbell coaches, we do the form checks every week in our Discord community that is private for app members, as well as they get access to all of the amazing programs we have built in there. So check it out, calgarybarbell.com, like, subscribe, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye.